Archaeologists pried open a sealed clay jar inside an Egyptian tomb, 3,000 years buried in the dark. Inside was honey, and it was still good. No mold, no rot. You could have spread it on bread right there in the burial chamber. Back in ancient Egypt, honey like that wasn't an accident. They knew exactly what they were doing. Here's the thing nobody really pictures about the old world. A full belly one day meant nothing about the next. Meat turned green in a day. Milk soured by morning. Fruit went to mush. And a winter didn't care how good the summer hunt had been. Catching food was the easy part. Keeping it was the whole fight. The families who cracked that lived to see spring. The ones who didn't were counting bones by February. So this is how they beat the rot. With fire, salt, cold mud, and a stubborn, hard-won read on the world. Start with the oldest trick there was, drying. A hunter in Ice Age Europe worked it out just by watching. Meat left in the sun and wind went hard and dark, and that hard, ugly strip didn't spoil. Water is what rot needs. Pull the water out, and the tiny things that turn meat green have nothing left to live on. So they sliced the kill into thin strips, hung them on racks over a low fire, or laid them on hot rocks under a dry sky. Days later, they had something that'd last for months in a pouch. Light, tough as leather. It kept a family fed on the move, deep into a season when nothing else grew. Then came fire's second gift, smoke. Somewhere along the line, a prehistoric fisher hung his catch above the coals overnight and noticed it held longer than the ones left in the open. Smoke doesn't only dry the fish, it coats it, wraps every strip in a thin skin that the rot makers can't stand. Around a Stone Age camp, the smoke rack was a lifeline. A single good run on the river could feed people for weeks. Hang it high, keep the fire low and smoky, and walk away. The fire did the work while you slept. But nothing changed the game like salt. Rub enough of it into meat, and it does what the sun does, only harder. It drags the water straight out and turns raw flesh into something that'll sit for a year. A Roman soldier on the frontier didn't march on fresh steak. He marched on salted pork, packed in barrels, hauled hundreds of miles from home. Whole legions ran on the stuff. And here's the part that tells you everything. Salt was so precious in ancient Rome that soldiers were sometimes paid in it. That white powder wasn't seasoning, it was money you could eat. Now flip it around. Some of the sharpest preserving didn't fight the rot at all. It aimed it. In an ancient Korean village, cabbage got packed with salt and buried in jars in the ground. That slow, steered souring, fermentation, made acid. And acid keeps the dangerous things out while the food turns sharp and tangy and holds through the cold months. All across the old world it showed up. Sour cabbage in the north, fish and grain left to work away in clay pots. The Romans took it the furthest and the strangest. In a Roman coastal town, they'd pile fish guts and salt into stone vats and leave them baking in the sun for months. It rotted, slowly, on purpose, down into a thick brown sauce they called garum. The smell was so foul that making it got banned inside the city walls. But pour off that liquid and you had something that kept for ages and sat on every table, from a slum to a palace. That was the bargain the ancients lived with. The thing that saved your food through winter was often the same thing that reeked, burned your hands, or cost a small fortune to make. Clever and brutal at the very same time. Take milk, the trickiest food of all. It turns sour in a day in the heat. So somewhere in the ancient Near East, herders flipped that weakness into a weapon. They curdled the milk, pressed out the water, salted it, and let it age in the dark. What they got was cheese. Milk that could sit for months instead of hours. A hard wheel aged in a cool cave could travel, trade hands, and ride out a whole winter. They took the food most likely to spoil and made it one of the longest lasting things in the pantry. Then there's the brine barrel. Around a Greek or Roman household, cucumbers, olives, and eggs went straight down into salty water or sharp vinegar. Sitting in that harsh liquid, food just couldn't rot. The salt and the sour turned the jar into a place spoilage could never get a grip. Olives, fresh off the branch, are bitter and useless. Soak them in brine for weeks, and they become something you can store and eat all year long. A row of sealed jars along a cool wall was a family's quiet insurance against the hungry months. And here's a quiet one that mattered more than it looks: turning food into drink. In ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, grain got brewed into beer, and fruit got pressed and fermented into wine. Locked up as alcohol, all that harvest energy kept for months, sometimes years, without a speck of mold. It was safer than the murky water, too, so people drank it daily, from small kids to the laborers hauling stone for the pyramids. A sealed jar of wine, its mouth plugged with resin, was last summer's fruit, saved for a cold, dark night. They leaned on the land itself, too. In a medieval kitchen, cooks packed meat with rosemary, thyme, and garlic, and those weren't only there for the flavor. Some of those herbs genuinely slowed the rot, beating back the tiny things that turn a good joint of meat. Wrap a cut in the right leaves, hang it in a cold larder, and it held a little longer. Every extra day was a day nearer to spring. When food couldn't be wasted, an old cook's knowledge of which plant did what was worth more than gold. Now, back to that Egyptian honey. This is why it worked. Honey barely holds any free water, and it's slightly acidic, so nothing at all can grow inside it. Seal fruit or meat away in a jar of it, and the honey guards it like armor. The Egyptians used the very same idea on their dead, sealing bodies off from air and moisture so time couldn't touch them. And where there was no honey, there was fat. On the North American plains, hunters pounded dried meat with fat and berries into pemmican, a dense brick that lasted years on the trail. Around a medieval kitchen, cooks cooked goose slow in its own fat, then packed it away under a hard seal of grease. Air is what spoils food, so they shut the air out. Just keep it cold. Long before anyone could make cold, people went out and stole it from the world. In ancient Persia, engineers raised the Yakchal, a giant mud brick dome sunk over a deep pit. In winter, they'd run water in to freeze, or haul ice down off the mountains and pack it tight in straw. That ice held clean through the desert summer. In the Roman Empire, runners carried snow down from the peaks so the rich could chill their wine and keep fish fresh in the heat. Poorer folk did the humble version, a pit dug into cool earth, a cellar under the house. Down there, apples and root vegetables rode out the winter in the dark. Some hiding spots were stranger still. Across ancient Ireland, people buried whole barrels of butter deep in the peat bogs. That cold, airless, acidic mud was a natural cold room, and some of those butter stashes stayed down so long they turned up centuries later, still holding their shape. Around a medieval farm, a crock of milk got lowered into the cold stream out back, tied off to a stake, the running water buying it a few more days. If you couldn't build the cold, you found where the earth was already keeping it, and you hid your food inside. Even plain fruit and roots got their own tricks. In a medieval storeroom, apples were laid out, never touching, each one on its own, so a single rotten apple couldn't drag down the rest. Carrots and parsnips got buried in boxes of dry sand, packed away cool and dark, pulled out crisp in the dead of winter. Nuts and grain sat high and dry, away from the mice. None of it looked clever. It was just knowing, right down to the single apple, exactly what rot wanted and taking it away. There was one more move, and it's almost too obvious to name. The best way to keep meat fresh was to not kill it yet. A peasant family in medieval Europe kept the animal alive right up to the day they needed it, walking their dinner to the table on its own 4 legs. And the grain that carried them through winter fought its own war on rot. In ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, they built granaries and sealed the grain away, bone dry, up off the ground, guarded from damp and mice. Wet grain molds and turns deadly. Dry grain just sleeps. A well-kept granary was the line between a city that ate through a bad year and one that didn't.
In the ancient world, a failed harvest wasn't a rough patch. It could wipe a village off the map. Every method, the drying racks, the salt barrels, the buried jars, the ice pits, was a bet placed against a winter that wanted you dead.
Get it right, and your family cracked open a jar of preserved fruit in the deep cold and tasted last summer all over again. Get it wrong, let the damp creep in, let the salt run short, and you sat there counting the weeks until the shelves went bare. There was nowhere to run and buy more. What you put away in autumn was every scrap you had.
So sit with what that really took.
Every dried strip, every salted haunch, every honey-sealed jar was somebody paying close attention, watching how the sun hardened meat, how the smoke clung, how cold bog mud could hold butter for a lifetime. Nobody handed them the rules on a page. They earned every one, through one lost harvest and one starving winter at a time, until a jar of honey could sit sealed in the dark for 3,000 years and still be waiting there, good as the day it was made, when someone finally lifted the lid.